India, the holy Ganges, the source of the first great religion of the world, Hinduism. The gods Vishnu and Shiva were being worshipped here over 3,000 years ago, just as they are today. From this valley, too, came another faith that was to inspire the world, that preached by the Lord Buddha. And 2,000 years ago, these powerful religions began to spread eastwards, carried by Indian traders and travelers across the Ganges and down into the equatorial jungles of the Far East. Inspired by the new faiths, the peoples living in the forests felled the trees and built great temples which still stand, half buried in the jungle. In the flat plains, kings built whole cities of temples to the glory of the Indian gods. In the islands south of the equator, Buddhists built artificial mountains to symbolize their view of the universe. On the walls they carved pictures showing how they lived and dressed, played music and danced. And everywhere they left images of the Hindu gods and of the Buddha. But the people of Southeast Asia were not mere imitators. They created their own styles and carved their own visions of beauty and holiness. And yet, powerful and enduring though these new faiths were, they did not totally obliterate the beliefs that had gripped people's minds since long before their arrival. Beliefs in the ghosts that dwell in the land and the spirits of men long dead who lived during the age of heroes at the beginning of the world. In Bali, the people still communicate directly with those ancient gods. If there's sickness in the village or a blight on the crops, they beseech the gods to come down and dance among them so that the evil shall be exorcised. Two small girls are drifting away into trance. The pungent smoke of incense fills their nostrils. Their spirits have left their bodies. Now the gods can descend and dance before the people in the bodies of pure children. The entranced children are carried through the village to the ground that has been prepared for the dance. No one has taught them the complex movements they perform so expertly. Their eyes have been firmly closed since they fell into trance, yet their dances are precisely coordinated. The music changes. The men take up a more vigorous chant. The exorcism is over. The priest must bring the children's own spirits back to their bodies with prayer and with holy water. For these people in Bali, the ancient gods still live. And all over Southeast Asia, in remote islands and isolated mountain valleys, people still seek aid from the spirits. East of Bali, on the island of Sumba, priests search the sea for reassurance that the ancient gods still care for their world. On the eve of a new year, at a particular phase of the moon, the gods will send a sign. The clear waters of the sea around the reefs should suddenly curdle into a mass of wriggling worms. The color of the worms and the way they behave will tell the priest what will happen in the year to come. It's a privileged glimpse of the future that mustn't be missed. The people living in Sumba today are descended from an ancient race whose home was somewhere on the mainland of Southeast Asia. They migrated south down the long peninsula of Malaya, and then about 4,000 years ago they began to build ships and voyage eastwards to settle in the fertile islands of Indonesia, and eventually here in Sumba. The tools they used were of stone, and the monuments they raised were of stone as well. Megaliths, tall pillars, colossal tables, and stone circles. Such megaliths are found isolated in jungles, forgotten on hillsides all over Indonesia. But Sumba is so remote that the later religions from India passed it by. Megalithic practices still continue, and in many villages, stone monuments still stand. Ritual still pervades the life of the people. The women weave magnificent cloths, intricately dyed with magical designs, portraying these shimmering images of men and animals. Such cloths are essential for gifts at a wedding and for wrapping a corpse at a funeral. The priests have detected the first signs in the sea. The worms will rise the next night, and they must walk the island with the news, accompanied by their privileged attendants carrying food. On these few specially sacred days each year, the priests are filled with magic power. It surrounds them as they walk. It's so intense that a stranger would be badly injured if he crossed their path. Dogs run yapping beside them, but the priests are also guarded by invisible spirit dogs, and a bite from them would cause madness, even death. Everyone keeps well out of the way of the little procession. The priests must spend the night in the special house which each village reserves for rituals. Here women cook special meals for them, and visitors come to hear their news and their prophecies.
Tin cô rồi tao ra thì tận đức tập tao bà tao nó cả cái nào nó tao gặp như vậy cũng năm mà nhận cái việc nó là phải là cũng năm của lối nhận cao chi nhất giờ cái đó cô cũng các bạn mai cô mà đức gặp cái đó thì giờ các bạn đi Funerary giờ cái nào các bạn
Chickens must be sacrificed to ensure that all will go well the next day. The bird's entrails can reveal whether the gods have accepted the gift and whether they will send the worms the following morning. As the moon rises that night, the strongest of the young men assemble on the beach. For the earth needs more than chicken blood if its continued fertility is to be assured. It demands the blood of humans. The men bind their fists with special grass. It has a sharp cutting edge to its blades. The men will now fight. One blow from these armed fists can draw blood. One blow can decide a fight. The skill is in picking the one moment to land it. As the men fight, the women dance. For this night, the night of the new year, is a night of license, when normal rules are abandoned, when the strongest of the men can take the loveliest of the women. From a string around their necks hangs a jewel of gold, an image of female fertility. Before the sun rises, the priests have resumed their vigil. As dawn breaks, the people wait anxiously for the signs. At last, some worms are brought in. If they had bitten the people as they were gathered, it would have meant that the crops would be ruined by rats. Had they broken when touched, it would have meant that there would be heavy rains and the crops would rot. They did neither. Next year, the land would be fertile and the harvest a good one. The priests announced their findings to the assembled people. Now the priests urged the young men to make one final rite, the pazola, a battle on horseback. The warriors carry long wooden spears. Although the points are blunt, they are nonetheless potentially lethal, and many men will certainly be injured within the next few hours. Almost every year, someone is killed. These violent rituals are a reminder that less than a century ago, the people of Sumba were still headhunters. A man went to battle to take a head and so prove his own virility and shed blood on the earth to guarantee its fertility. There are still old men on the island who remember human heads being boiled and skinned and the white skull displayed in triumph on the village shrines. If someone dies in the duels today, his blood, in the eyes of many, will not have been wasted. Sumba lies on the southernmost edge of Asia, a last fragment of land facing the emptiness of the Indian Ocean. 1,600 miles farther west, along that rim, there's another island, just as remote, and a place where the megalithic culture that just survives on Sumba still flourishes, Nias. Nias lies almost exactly on the equator, just off the west coast of Sumatra, so far away from the trade routes that for centuries the outside world knew no more of it than as a place to go to catch slaves. The Dutch eventually claimed Nias as part of their empire in the East Indies. They laboured hard to convert the people to a particularly austere sect of Christianity, and in the north of the island they succeeded to a considerable degree. But here in the southern half they had little success. The people built their villages not on the coast where they could be easily raided, but hidden away among the hills. Each village is surrounded by stone fortifications and consists of a single wide street, flanked on either side by immense wooden houses. And in front of the houses, the stone monuments, the megaliths, for which the island is famous. The main timbers of the houses are gigantic, complete trunks of huge trees that have been trimmed smooth. They've been put together so skillfully that no nail is needed in the entire house. The wide street is the focus of all village life. It's neatly paved with stone so that even in the torrential storms of the monsoon, it never turns into a quagmire. Here village meetings are held, here the people assemble for great rituals, and here in the past, warriors dance before setting out for war. Back in the 1920s, a Dutch explorer lugged a heavy film camera up here. These men were still ferocious warriors, warring among themselves in an endless search for human heads. They kept slaves and sacrificed them when they built new houses. Less sensationally, but of equal interest, they practiced their megalithic culture in more complete a form than anywhere else on Earth. And that was of particular fascination to many European anthropologists, for Europe too, after all, had passed through its own megalithic phase some 3,000 years ago, when Stonehenge and the other circles of standing stones had been put up all over Western Europe. Here in Nias, there was a chance to see a megalithic culture that was in full vigor. And even now, 50 years later, it has not died. Stone jumping was a test of virility as well as a training for warriors who might have to leap the walls of an enemy village at night with a flaming torch in one hand and a spear in the other. The stone stands over 7 feet tall, and originally the penalty for failing to clear it properly was not just disgrace, but rather more extreme. For on the far side of the stone, spears were wedged between the paving stones, pointing upwards. Stone jumping was a regular preliminary to the war parades held before men left on headhunting expeditions. And war dances are still performed today with full-blooded relish as part of any great celebration in the village. When the men returned from battle, they were greeted by the women with dances of great grace and gravity. Their head decorations are of metal, painted yellow, but only a generation ago they were of gold. No gold occurs naturally on the island, but the word for it in Nias, kana'a, comes from Sanskrit, and is evidence that the people obtained the metal by trade from Hindu colonies in Sumatra, or even from India itself, 1,500 miles away across the ocean. The stones in front of the houses are monuments both for the living and the dead. A man may put one up so that the spirit of a great ancestor may have a seat from which to watch the events of the village. But he may also put it up for his own glory. For a man cannot become great and rise in the aristocratic society of Nias unless he demonstrates his wealth and power with megaliths. Many of them are delicately carved. Some carry the symbols of chiefdom. But the installation of a stone was not simply a matter of carving and transporting it. The ritual of setting it up demanded human sacrifice, and some stones carry images of those who were slaughtered. Some of the stones are ancient, but many of the most beautiful and expertly carved are less than a century old. A man's status was also shown by the size of his house. A chief's must be the tallest in the village. This one was probably built 200 or 300 years ago, and the young aristocrat, who had only recently succeeded his father, told me how such magnificent buildings were constructed. Ada rumah raja, ya? Ya. Kenapa rumah lebih besar?
Kalau dulu sudah siap sebuah rumah, maka rumah itu dipestakan. Pestanya itu hanya 2 gendangnya itu. 1 potong babi, 2 potong manusia.
Aha.
Cari kepala orang.
Ya?
Ya, cari kepala orang.
Aduh.
Jadi habis lebih dulu cari kepala manusia. Habis sudah ada kepala manusianya, potong babi baru pesta. Jadi waktu didirikan rumah ini, pertama-tama cari kepala manusia dulu. Baru nanti kalau sudah siap, sudah diatapi, diambil pesta dan banyak kepala manusia di situ. Ada suatu syair dari nenek saya dulu. Syairnya mitai pajue mitai paiki nomo tu hoga majili masih hala lovelangi. Artinya, mari kita tengok rumah yang sudah siap itu. Mukanya serupa muka Tuhan, serupa ya bersih, tidak ada yang suatu yang tidak dapat atau yang dicelah orang. Suatu rumah dibikin mesti ada dia punya simbol. Simbolnya adalah ini, buaya.
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 Ya.
Monyet di sana. Ini monyet.
Ya.
Monyet. Jadi simbol itu menandakan buaya ini dia paling raja air.
Ya.
Raja air.
Ya. Saya tahu.
Bisa hidup di air, bisa hidup di darat.
Ya.
Artinya di mana saja di bawah saya ini oke, mau saja. Ya, gitulah pengertian dulu dari simbol-simbol rumah ini menandakan bahwa dia raja yang tertinggi.
Up in the rafters of the Nias houses, there were once great numbers of images like these. They were made to provide homes for the souls of the dead. A man has several souls. When he dies, one ascends to the sky, but another, the heart soul, the moko, doesn't leave the body until later, when it emerges as a small spider. The attentive relatives, when they find it, take it to one of these wooden images and carefully persuade it to crawl over the wood. The soul will then pass into the image. If later the image cracks, then that shows that the heart soul is dissatisfied and is roaming abroad once more. So a new image must be made. The young chief holds a meeting, and his orator announces his plans. A stone must be brought down from a deserted site and re-erected in the main village square. That is the proper way to treat such a stone. It honors the spirits of those who originally put it up. It will make clear the new chief's rank and wealth, and it will serve his spirit in good stead after his death. The ceremonies begin, as all ceremonies do in Nias, with a martial dance. A pig must be sacrificed. In front of the place where the stone will be erected stands a head crudely carved from the stem of a banana tree. Only 50 years ago, it would have been that of a slave. The stone has been brought into the village on a wooden stretcher. One by one, the women gravely pay homage to the stone and the spirit it contains. The young chief's ornaments in imitation gold are emblems of virility, a symbolic moustache and beard. In the past, golden regalia was always worn first by a slave because, newly made, it was filled with a dangerous magic. The slave who wore it absorbed that magic, making the regalia safe. He was then beheaded. The chief presents the pig to the spirits in the stone. It's beneath his dignity to perform the act of slaughter himself. That must be done later by a warrior. All that's required from him is to claim the pig's life symbolically with a touch. Now the praises of the chief must be declaimed. He has given a feast, he's set up a stone, he's raised his own prestige and brought honor to the village. Next door to Nias lies a much bigger island, Sumatra. In its center, a vast lake formed in the crater of an extinct volcano. And in the middle of the lake, an island almost half as big as Nias itself. This is the home of the Bataks. The people who lived here were much feared by those in the settlements around the coast, for the Bataks were famed as wizards, people capable of murdering by magic. The Bataks, too, erected megaliths and built stone sepulchres to hold the skulls and bones of the dead, dug up from the graves after 2 years of burial and brought to the village for safekeeping. The source of a magician's power was his staff. All were magnificently carved. An old lady, wife of a great chief, explained how carefully this had to be done. Many years ago, the wife of the magician whose image appears on the top of the staffs gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl. Twins are unlucky, and in Batak belief they should be put to death. But the magician's wife didn't do so. In punishment, the twins were caught by the thorns of a tree growing in the forest and absorbed into its trunk. Their father, the magician, went to rescue them, but he too was consumed by the tree. Because of this, the wood of this particular tree has a special magic power. But having the right wood is not enough. The wand only becomes effective if it's given a supernatural charge, a special medicine placed in a cavity in its head and bound in position by strips of cloth. This medicine, pupuk, was prepared in the most horrible of ways. A small child was stolen from an enemy village and sacrificed. Its brains were then compounded with other secret ingredients and stored in special pots. A small speck of it in the head of the staff gave it the power to cause rain and bring death to enemies. But in the end, the magic powers of the Batak were not enough. Fresh waves of people who had the technological skills of Oriental civilizations came and settled around the coasts of Sumatra, and the Bataks, over the centuries, were driven into the mountains of the interior. A similar thing happened to the Toraja, early inhabitants of the island of Sulawesi, or the Celebes as it used to be called. They too now live only in the center of their island, but their land is fertile and beautiful. Like the Bataks and the people of Nias, they too once practiced the megalithic culture, and beside many of their villages there are still circles of stone. Today they are used as arenas for animal sacrifice, though whether that was their original purpose is not certain. Like the other ancient peoples of Indonesia, they believe in the continuing presence of spirits, and this has led them to make funerals the most important of all their ceremonials. The dead are placed in cliffs, some in caves, some in tombs excavated in the cliff face. And beside them stand memorial effigies of wood dressed in the clothes of the dead. They're placed in these galleries high on the cliffs so that they can gaze out over the rice fields where once they labored. It's said that the traditional Toraja houses, with their magnificent eaves, are built in imitation of the ships that first brought the people to the island many centuries ago. In front of the chief's house are nailed the horns of buffalo that died in sacrifices. The buffalo head, too, forms a recurring motif in the decoration with which the houses are covered, for buffaloes are a crucial element in Toraja life. They're the most valuable of all possessions, and a man takes pride in an animal's markings and in its strength and bravery. Fights between bulls are part of all celebrations of any pretension. Buffaloes are so precious, in fact, that none is ever killed for meat. Their deaths are reserved for the gods. Men, dressed as buffaloes with horns on their heads, come in procession to mark the beginning of a great funeral ceremony. Buffalo, their horns specially decorated, follow the dancers, for a prince is about to be buried. 10,000 people have come from all over Sulawesi for this event, and an entire temporary village has been built out of bamboo to house them all. When the ceremony is over, it will be burnt to the ground. The celebrations will last for 3 weeks. The cost to the prince's family is immense, and even they, among the richest of all the Toraja, have had to save up for several years. All that time, the prince's body, wrapped in cloths, has been kept in his house. But now it can be taken to its grave. The coffin is wrapped in silks with the golden stars that are a prince's prerogative. He must also be given an effigy to stand on the cliff beside the grave. His wife cares for it, dressing it in the prince's clothes, decorating it with golden necklaces. But in one way, this effigy is a break with tradition. The sculptor who carved it explains that he has, for the first time in Toraja land, tried to produce not an idealized image, but a living likeness. He used a color photograph. That served for the front view. For the profile, he said, he had to use his imagination. During his life, the prince had been generous, contributing buffalo to the funerals of others. Now, at his death, all those debts must be repaid. 200 animals will be sacrificed, and their souls will accompany that of the prince to heaven, so that he will be surrounded by wealth just as he was on earth. His body is taken through the temporary funeral village on one last tour of his lands. His senior widow and his family lead him, holding the long scarlet cloth that wraps his coffin. At long last, the cliff is reached, and the king's body will be hauled up to its stone sepulchre. Now his effigy will join those of his ancestors in their gallery overlooking the plains. So in these remote corners of Indonesia, in Nias and Sumatra, in Sumba and Sulawesi, the ancient animistic religions have survived. But in most of the islands, they died, swamped by the faiths that were brought here from India. And that conquest is reenacted symbolically and dramatically every year in Bali. Hinduism began to win converts in Java and Bali about 1,300 years ago. At that time, according to legend, the people were terrorized by a giant king, Sang Maya Denawa, who compelled them to worship in certain ways. Perhaps he symbolized the animistic gods and demons who had cruelly demanded human sacrifices since prehistory. At any rate, the Balinese rebelled and sought help from the Indians who were already settling around their shores. There was a titanic battle in which many of the Indian warriors died heroically, but Sang Maya Denawa was finally vanquished. Today, Hinduism has a firmer hold on the people of Bali than on any other people in the whole of Southeast Asia. Every village has its temple where the Hindu gods are worshipped and given offerings. Every village also has its priest, Balinese-born, who understands Sanskrit, the ancient Indian script, and prays to Vishnu and Shiva. Once a year, images of those Indian warriors who came to fight Sang Maya Denawa are brought out of their temple and placed in travelling shrines, for now they themselves have become powerful spirits, devas. Some people carry offerings of dolls made of coins strung together. The warrior spirits, the devas, are brought out from the temple. They are taken down to a sacred spot by the river, there to be blessed by the priest. As the devas return, refreshed and purified, the men who carry them begin to fall into trance. By now, night is falling, and as they reach the temple, the devas are so roused that they force the shrines to rear and plunge as though they had a life of their own. Once more, the battle with Sangmaya Dinawa must be fought. The forces of Hinduism must drive out the ancient demons. The gods' supporters in the crowd themselves become entranced and rush to give the gods help, waving steel daggers. They must be disarmed before they injure themselves. But that must be done with great care, for a man in trance has superhuman strength. Once again, the battle has been won. Hinduism has triumphed and the devas can return to their temple. Yet the forces of animism against which they struggled have not been totally extinguished. For paradoxically, in the very ritual of victory, the worshippers have been possessed not by the Hindu gods, but by the spirits of the dead.